No, you see, he's leading the people astray. He's leading the crowds astray. And how would he be leading them astray? Well, if you think that the Pharisaical interpretation and strictures are the Word of God and are necessary to be believed, then you would have to think that Jesus was leading people astray. And certainly the Pharisees viewed it that way. But this was being done in whispers, because there was a recognition that the leadership of the Jews, no one was speaking openly of him for fear of the Jews. There was already that recognition that's going to then come more fully into expression in chapter 9, when it is mentioned that the Jewish leadership had already decided that anyone who confesses Jesus or believes that Jesus is a prophet of God is to be put out of the synagogue. And again, that's a whole lot more in that day than what in our society being put out of a church would mean, at least to most people. So the feast has been going on for a while. So in the midst of it, and if you arrive in the midst, you haven't gone up, again, is another way of expressing that. Jesus goes into the temple and he begins to teach. And the Jews, again, are astonished at the level of his teaching. They're astonished that this is not, some people actually assert that what's being said here is that Jesus was not taught to read or something like that. That's not what it's saying. It can literally be understood that way, but that's not what it's saying. The point is he was not a part of the rabbinical schools. And yet he knew God's truth. And over again throughout the Gospels it is mentioned that the people were astounded because he taught with such authority. It wasn't like their scribes who were just always saying, well, Rabbi so-and-so said this and Rabbi so-and-so said that. Jesus, knowing their amazement, answered and does what he did in chapter 5. Once again, he emphasizes the absolute unity that exists between the Father and the Son. Unitarians see this and they assume that what Jesus is doing is making himself less than deity. He's somehow eschewing the very worship that's going to be given to him in chapter 9, the very claims that he makes in chapter 8 about being the I am, etc., etc. No. The emphasis is on the unity that exists between Father and Son. He says, my teaching is not my own, but it is his who sent me. The Father has sent me with a message, and I am perfectly delivering that message. It does not come from me. There is perfect unity between myself and the Father. I am not some competing deity. I am not calling for a division in the worship of God, anything like that at all. There is perfect unity between myself and my Father. And then we have verse 17. Now, verse 17 is very often cited by individuals who deny the total depravity of man. It is often cited as a proof text saying, see, everyone has this ability to be willing. The text isn't saying anything about this. In fact, when Jesus actually does address whether a person has the power to believe on their own, to will to know his truth, anything like that, what is Jesus' constant refrain all through the Gospel of John? Dunatai, not able. Why is it you are, very next chapter, he's going to say, why is it you are not able to hear my words? Because you don't belong to God. He's not addressing that subject here, but what he is saying is he is giving us an amazing insight as to how we can know whether the message of Jesus is perfectly in harmony with the message of the Father. And it requires, however, a person to have a certain disposition. And I would say to you that biblically speaking, especially when you can take into consideration the entire teaching of the Bible on this subject, that biblically speaking, the only way you can have this disposition is if your heart has been changed. If you take Romans 1, Romans 3 into consideration, it's very clear. If anyone is willing to do his will, if you have the disposition in your heart that I want to do the will of God. Now he's talking to people that he's asking, why do you want to kill me? He's talking to people who say, you have the law of Moses, why don't you do it? He's talking to hypocrites. So these are not people who want to do his will. Jesus is saying, if anyone wills to do his will, they will know concerning my teaching whether it is from God or whether I'm speaking of my own. If you have the proper heart, is this really anything different than what Jesus says in John chapter 10? Remember what he says in John chapter 10? My sheep hear my voice. You have to be his sheep to hear his voice. You have to have the disposition to want to do the will of God, to be able to recognize that perfect harmony that exists between the Father and the Son, and the fact that the Son is in fact delivering the Father's message, the Father's teaching, the Father's doctrine. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory. But he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there is no unrighteousness in him. He's speaking of himself. He's saying, I'm not seeking my own glory. I'm seeking the glory of the one who sent me. And therefore, what I'm saying is true. And I myself am true. And there is no unrighteousness in that one. This is a high claim that Jesus makes. Did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? And what's the greatest illustration of this? Why do you seek to kill me? Now he's going to expand upon that elsewhere in John. I'm a man who spoke the truth to you, and yet you're seeking to kill me. John chapter 8. The conversation will continue in the next chapter. And why would they seek to kill him? Because there's no truth in them. The law says one thing. Moses gave you that law, yet you're not carrying out that law, because if you did, you would love the one sent by the Father. The crowd's answer is obviously brusque and rough. You have a demon who seeks to kill you. Jesus reminds them of John chapter